Wheel of Genre, the show for readers who easily lose their head. Right now, we are reading every short story in Ann and Jeff VanderMeer's The Weird Anthology, including this one, Augusto Monterroso's Mr. Taylor. I'm Zach, and this week I'm really interested in how, for this anthology at least, I think this might be the first time we've really seen the weird blend in with social commentary, at least on such an explicit level.
I'm Bob. I'm really interested in something similar, Zach. I'm interested in when the weird becomes normalized, at least for many, many, many people. It seems that the weird kind of becomes manufactured by the people in the story, and it becomes almost domestic.
But what do we know about Monterroso?
Well, he's apparently a part of the Latin American boom. We're going to read Julio Cortázar later. And then he's also part of the club kind of with Carlos Fuentes, Juan Rulfo, and Gabriel Garcia Marquez. So they all were writing at this time and created a whole literary camp.
Yeah, so apparently due to political opposition to Jorge Ubico, who was a dictator who ruled from 1931 to 1944, he was exiled to Mexico. So even though he's Guatemalan, most of his literary life took place in Mexico. It was based in Mexico until his death in 2003. He's also credited, as we're told in the editorializing of the story, with writing the shortest story ever, which goes, "When she awoke, the dinosaur was still there." And that's a copyright strike on the channel.
Because you just read the entire story. That's true.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, so this story is interesting because you have a guy, you have a gringo who gets a shrunken head from someone, and he sends it off to his New York uncle. Well, one thing leads to another. He realizes that his uncle is probably flipping them himself. So these heads become kind of like a mass export, I should say. And eventually, we witness in kind of 2x speed societal transformations resulting from the industry being based around cutting people's heads off, shrinking them, and exporting them out. And then we end with the final and conclusive Mr. Taylor himself, his shrunken head, returns home.
Staring back up at his uncle.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is nuts. I think what you said was really interesting. It feels like a social commentary. The gringo goes like, "Oh, I think I could send this to New York, make some money off of this." And then it becomes so incredibly destructive. People are going out. Basically, okay, so first, whenever people die, they decide, oh, we can use their head. They die of natural causes. We'll shrink the head. We'll send it off. And then it becomes, well, people are not really dying fast enough to meet demand. So they start making all of these different rules. So that one is so strict. What does it say? If you said it's really hot today and it's not actually that hot, you would be executed on the spot, and then your head would be shrunk.
Right. Just like these increasingly absurd pretexts for just harvesting more and more heads. And I love how, I mentioned this at the beginning, but the culture itself of the place begins to warp itself around this practice. So we read, for the first time in history, the importance of doctors, there were various Nobel Prize candidates, who didn't cure anyone was recognized. Dying was turned into the most exalted example of patriotism, not only on a national scale, but instead more glorious on the continental. So fundamental values of any society, I think, that a doctor's role is to make sure someone gets better, to make sure that a sick person becomes healthy again, is suddenly flipped on its head. And we live in a society now where, for the sake of industry, we actually want more bodies. It actually reminds me of the Philip K. Dick story that we read, Dr. Futurity, which operated on a similar logic, but for different reasons. That story kind of revolved around a society-wide eugenics program where embryos were being popped out of a machine at the rate of every time someone died, a new genetically better embryo would come out of this machine. So doctors in that story too were incentivized there were no doctors in that story, and patients, when they got sick, were incentivized to just let themselves go. Interesting connection.
It's even weird too, because I mean, when people would get old and they would just go out, they became targets for young people driving their cars. So, the young people would go and knock them over to kill them and, go on with the population, have a new person born. It feels similar in this too, where the doctors, yes, they're getting Nobel Prizes for killing people faster, but they're also encouraged, like they make a law that if you get really, really sick, like with a communicable disease, then you are executed in 24 hours, unless the disease is really communicable and you can go and infect other family members. And then each family member you infect, you get an extra 24 hours to live. So it becomes this, it's not really drawn out, but there's a paranoia underneath all of the text. It's just this happened and this happened and this happened. It's very plot heavy, and it feels very much like Alfred Cuban's The Other Side, where this weirdness, whatever it is, or whatever these transformations are, layer by layer by layer, are taking this whole, as it said, continent over.
I like the comparison to Alfred Cuban's The Other Side. But what that comparison does for me is highlight, in a sense, the ways in which I don't think it's similar. Just hear me out on this. Hear me out, because I feel like Alfred Cuban is like art for the sake of art. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of weird dreamlike stuff that happens in there, but it feels very divorced from real life in a sense. This story reminded me more of Sansom's The Long Sheet, which we read earlier in this story, which involved people with a big wet sheet, and they were in prison and they had to find ways to dry the sheet. It's a really weird setup, but fundamentally the important takeaway is that it's an allegory talking about, human nature and the way people deal with stress and the way people deal with challenges, especially in a hopeless environment. And what I got from this story was I felt like this too was so heavily reliant on the allegory that in a sense it almost undercuts the weirdness of it, undercuts the capital W theoretical weirdness of it.
I was wondering about this too. We've run into a couple stories now as where I think we're getting further in time, maybe as part of it too, but more of them seem lowercase w weird. The other ones where we're all capital W weird is like, okay, there's a new kind of system overlaying itself on this old system, or there's this thing from another dimension coming out. There's like a dimensionality aspect to these stories where something is eclipsing another. But this does feel maybe weird for weird's sake, but it is allegorical. It's this social commentary that uses weirdness as the engine for storytelling. Or is there something weird, capital W weird, hidden in this story?
I have to wonder if what we're witnessing is the transition away from like early weird, which to me feels like an offshoot of Victorian horror, the occult scene, towards surrealism, which is, coming more from like psychoanalysis and like reactions to war and politics and like the changing industrializing culture. And I wonder if that is a large part of what we're picking up on, the sense that like fundamentally the presuppositions have changed.
I wonder if they started to change when we started reading Stefan Grabinski and then Fritz Leiber. Those two stories are right next to each other, and they're very much about modernity, or the demon of modernity taking over, or modernity as this ghost that keeps showing up, haunting this guy. This feels like, it's very much about war. It's very much about one culture taking over or taking advantage of another. And there even is war in this story. We have when we're not getting enough heads after all of the natural mortalities, after all of these doctors helping along mortalities, after these laws about communicable diseases and overstating, hyperbole, getting killed for hyperbole. They look around and they realize, oh, we've killed everyone who's not an administrator in this project. What do we do? Oh, we could go wage war on other people. And they say in 3 months, we were back in business. It feels like, they just keep making money. This premise that is weird goes so far that it totally ends this society, this city. And it then becomes trying to still grasp that system that was working, working for them to make money, but then they have to carry it on. It feels kind of weird in that too, where it's like they've exhausted all life by using it, and now they have to go somewhere else and take more life to continue to exhaust more life. It feels somewhat weird. Like they are themselves the capital W weird because they've decided to do this.
Yeah. And you know what? I think by pointing out the stories that it reminded you of, when that flip happens with Fritz Leiber and Donald Wollheim's Smoke Ghost and Mimic, respectively, you know, those two stories, the weird aspect was a monster. It was an object beyond the speaker. But in this story, there's no monster and there's no weird object. You know what I mean? The weirdness is everyday life itself. It's just describing a weird situation. And yet the weird situation is not viewed as weird by any character in the story. It's normal. It's everyday life. And I think that the implication of that we're supposed to take is to look at it like a mirror and be like, oh, wait a minute. Our lives are just as weird as this fictional situation, you know?
I wanted to, when you started describing it as like the business as usual almost, he keeps referring to this business book that he has. He says, oh, what is it? What does it say at the end too? I haven't hurt anyone as long as I don't think less of the common man, even though he's killed like millions of, he's killed everybody. But he tells himself, I don't think poor people are bad. So he says, I'm still okay. It reminds me a lot of Franz Kafka's In the Penal Colony, where we thought, okay, why are we obsessed with this machine? Why are we obsessed with the smoothness of the machine, how well it works, all of the pieces that make it work so well? This feels like we are weirding the bureaucracy or weirding like how well a company can work, because it's all about how effective all of their plans are. And then when they have a problem, how do they pivot and how do they adjust? It's like any string of administrators running a company, and you look at it like, oh, that's efficient. And then you look, it's like, oh, we've cut off everyone's head.
I like your comparison to Kafka. I feel like In the Penal Colony is a really good touchstone for this. Though I will say I'm pretty impressed at the editorial restraint, because I think they've described like 4 or 5 authors as like the Polish Franz Kafka, the British Franz Kafka. And no one, I mean, for some reason, they felt like the Guatemalan Franz Kafka was not what they wanted to put on this. Maybe there's another Guatemalan writer who's, yeah.
I think you're right. This whole anthology is full of Franz Kafka's, but he is similar to Franz Kafka in a way too, because it's very funny. Like the story is really funny for how harrowing it sounds, all of these beheadings, but the writing style is like Donald Barthelme or like Franz Kafka. We noticed in the Penal Colony, very disturbing, bloody, gory story, but we couldn't help but notice all of the relationships are very weird, and it's almost like slapstick comedy. While you have this terrible machine digging into someone's back, there is weird slapstick comedy of like, and then we got the doctors to make if you're infectious, go visit your family, kill it. It's really strange because it goes so far that it feels very, as people say, Kafka-esque.
Yeah, I mean, some of the funniest moments in this, I mean, just like from the very beginning, the whole entire premise is based off of a miscommunication. Someone pops out from the weeds and offers to sell him a shrunken head. It says, it is unnecessary to say that Mr. Taylor was in no position to buy it. But as apparently he didn't understand this, the Indian felt terribly embarrassed due to not speaking English well, and he gave Mr. Taylor the head as a gift, seeking pardon. So like the whole thing is kind of like based off of a misunderstanding, and from that misunderstanding, things just spiral out of control. It's funny. You're right. Funny it is.
Funny it is.
I guess the last thing I want to call attention to is this is an author whose style is exactly like what I love in stories, which is like, it's funny, it's weird, but it's also like, he has a way of describing emotions that's kind of like, think the Pink Floyd album cover, a white light shining through a prism, and it separates it out into different colors. Like, he takes a feeling and uses anecdotes to illustrate it in really interesting ways. So like he writes here, I'll just read it. The coffin manufacturer was more sad and funereal than ever before, and everyone felt as though they had awakened from a pleasant dream, from that wonderful dream in which you find a bag full of gold coins and you place it under your pillow and go back to sleep. And very early the next day, upon waking, you search for it and find emptiness. Wow. And then it's back to the narrative.
Pure gold.
Yeah.
I think too, you mentioned it earlier, the funny kind of ironic little twist. Mr. Taylor has been there the whole time. He's making all this money. And then when his own head gets sent back to his uncle, it's a weird description because his uncle opens the box and then his nephew's staring back at him as if to say, what is it? What does it say? As if to say, oh yeah, I knew I should never have done that. He's basically apologizing for all that happened, but now he's a shrunken little head inside of a box.
Well, all I can say is, while this is a very good short story, it is actually my second favorite piece of writing about shrunken heads. The first being Mary Ruefle's My Private Property, which is like a kind of like essayistic type nonfiction thing going on. But anyways, if anyone's watching this right now and wants to keep that train rolling, keep that ball rolling down the lane, that shrunken head bowling ball.
Screaming skull rolling.
Yeah. Check out Mary Ruefle's My Private Property. I'll talk to you later, Bob.
Talk to you later, Zach.